WNST, first local sporting event in some time if you've tuned out on Oriole baseball. And the Ravens went out to Indianapolis. Luke Jones, I remember when that used to create a stir around here, right? Hey, they're going to Indianapolis. We got to go out there. Maybe they'll start a fight in practice or something. All came and went, and I guess the short story long is now after 3 preseason games or 2.5 or whatever you're going to call that thing in Canton a couple of weeks ago, Lamar Jackson's not going to be the quarterback of this team anytime soon, correct?
Yeah, I think we knew that. And I think what we saw on Monday night was Lamar Jackson getting off to a really, really, really rough start. And I think the positive side of that is he was able to recover as the game went on and actually kind of finished his night on a high note with a really nice touchdown pass throwing on the run, rolling to his right, hit his third progression on that play. So I continue to kind of laugh whenever I hear national types or even some Ravens fans who might be more down on Joe Flacco than the typical fan even that they try to make this argument that Jackson's going to play sooner rather than later, and I just haven't seen it. And
I see these comments on Facebook from these idiots. I hate Joe Flacco, but, well, then just go hate the Ravens. I don't know what the hell to tell you. If you hate Joe Flacco after 10 years, you're the problem, not Joe Flacco, I assure you.
Well, and that's fine, but it's also fine to criticize him. He hasn't played to a level.
The result is the result, right? They haven't been good enough, right?
But my point is, Lamar Jackson's looked like a rookie, and he's looked like a rookie that was the 5th quarterback taken in April's draft, and that's not a knock on him. I still think there's plenty there to like, but I think what we've seen has been many of the criticisms of him coming out of Louisville and his weaknesses, his strengths, have come to fruition as far as him playing quarterback in the NFL.
And it's hard to take your weakness and make it your weakness in college and make it something that's not a weakness in the pros. It's kind of like hitting a baseball, right? They're moving the shift and they're doing what you're doing. They're going to take away what he does or try to take away what he does. And, speed's hard to kill, but when you have linebackers that can run 4.3, it becomes a lot more easy to neutralize in the NFL than it does at Virginia Tech, right?
Sure. Certainly teams are going to be able to handle his mobility and his speed in a far more effective way than college teams could. But I think the big question for him remains how functional, how consistent can he be from the pocket? I think we're still seeing the accuracy issues that kind of the knock on, or not even the knock, but the MO on him in college was he'll make some absolutely fantastic throws and certainly has the athleticism, is not just a runner coming out of the pocket. He'll move and he'll still keep his eyes downfield and he'll still make plays with his arm, which is what you want, by the way. But when he's had his issues is when his mechanics break down a little bit more in the pocket and he's not as accurate, and and also those instances where he does take off to run a little bit sooner than he should. So I continue to say my biggest concern with Lamar Jackson is the number of hits he's willingly taking. Not so much talking in the pocket. I think his clock is something that's going to improve as time goes on, and I think that's something that just is an evolution for quarterbacks as they get to the NFL level, and understanding that you might not have a great offensive line at the NFL level might give you 4 seconds in the pocket rather than 6 seconds in college. So you just have to understand that that pressure is going to be there, and you have to function. I think the thing that worries me though is we again saw him take another hit in the open field on Monday night, and you have to be selective with those instances where you're going to get hit. It's great in the 4th quarter when you're trying for a first down on a game-winning drive. It's great in January when you're playing in the playoffs, but I don't want to see that in the 3rd quarter or the 2nd quarter of a preseason.
But as I said on Twitter, that's his game. That is his game. That's what he does. And if they believe he cannot do that or turtle up or slide or start to do. I don't know how they're coaching him for that, but I know when I've talked to John, and I know you were there when I talked to John about this, you can't undo what he does. That's what he does. He runs. And I cringe. I really do. I cringe every time.
And for me, it's not about running. It's about understanding, picking up the yardage you can get, and then getting down, getting out of bounds, sliding. And I think that's something that's learned because, look, the quarterbacks who are good at that in the NFL, I guarantee you, they weren't sliding in high school. They were taking hits because they were bigger than everyone else. And that is a process that I think you can learn, and I think you can do those things. No one's asking him to just stand in the pocket and not run. I mean, if that's what you expect from him, then I don't know why you drafted him, because that is part of the allure. That is part of his skill set that is so special. My point is, I don't want to see a guy over the course of a 60-minute game taking 6 or 7 hits in the open field. If it's 1 or 2 and they're in big moments and it's on converting a big third down to keep a touchdown drive going, yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying, be a little more judicious with it. Be a little more selective. And that's where I've had my concerns with him, because you aren't talking about a 240-pound quarterback. This is a guy that is a little bit smaller. Not that he's too small to play quarterback, but that's just those instincts, and they're not instincts because they're learned behaviors. But that's something that I certainly want to see him continue to grow with. For him to be a quarterback in this league, he's got to be able to stay on the field. That availability piece is so huge, and all you have to do is look at RG3 as an example of how not to proceed. That's a pretty good case study for Lamar Jackson to learn from.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Cole Roofing. Billy Cole's going to be here talking about the Terps fiasco, and at some point I'm going to get together with Luke and chat with him about that as well. Our friends at Sporticulture, I'm going to have beautiful flowers in here behind me on the Facebook Live as well as the YouTube WNSTV channel. You're going to be learning more about them and their NFL licensed flowers this year, as well as our friends at Charles Newsonoff & Sons since 1923. We're talking about jewelry, diamonds, watches, gifts. They say 50th anniversary. I don't have 50. My 50th birthday is coming up. Charles Newsonoff in Parkville. Let's grow old together. Also, our friends at the Modell Lyric, where John Cusack's coming in, as well as Steely Dan for my 50th birthday, and Kansas. And I did an interview with the Kansas violinist David Ragsdale. That's out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. Luke's going to be running around with the Orioles this week. We got the Ravens back after it on Saturday night. And back to Lamar Jackson here, Mr. Jackson, if you're nasty. I always think that anyway, but as he runs around. I would just say on him, and look, it's 3 preseason games. It's watching him run around a little bit. I have a very, very hard time envisioning him being a quarterback that's going to win 12 or 13 games in this league and stay healthy doing it, and having me betting on it instead of against it. And I know it's raw. I know it's early. I know they love the kid. The kid might have stayed there to the 3rd or 4th round if they didn't draft him. He might have been the next player taken. I don't know. I don't know how the other teams felt about him. I know they all felt about him enough to pass on him once. And I know the Ravens are looking for a splash here or whatever. And I think and I said this because I was watching the game with my wife on Monday night. I said, I don't know that he's ever going to win 13 games, but I bet he's going to contribute to them winning 1 or 2 this year because of this wrinkle slash. I mean, I remember when they brought Cordell Stewart in Pittsburgh, what it did to a defense and how it makes you. But they need to be effective. You know what I mean? If bringing him into a game leads to a turnover, leads to a 12-yard loss, I can see that could be the kind of experiment that Harbaugh and Flacco, specifically in the middle of a year like this, are going to show incredible frustration about. Because when they bring him in there, he needs to be a really good decoy, a really good weapon, and good things need to happen when he steps on the field. And I think that's a really high expectation for a guy that's going to be on the field. What? 4, 6, 8 snaps a game, maybe?
Yeah, and I mean, as far as your first point, I have no idea what Lamar Jackson's going to be. I can tell you this. Joe Flacco looked terrible as a rookie at this point in the preseason,
sure.
And no one would have thought if he was going to have to play that the Ravens were going to win 11 games and go to the AFC Championship. So there's a little context.
That being said, nobody thought Troy Smith was going to win 8 games either, by the way.
Right. But my point is Flacco looked completely overmatched, completely out of his element. I mean, his first couple preseason games looked clueless, quite frankly. And then he had the third preseason game where he had to play out of necessity, and all of a sudden the light bulb went on a little bit. So I don't know about Lamar Jackson for the future. I know he needs a lot of work, but I think that was understood. As for your second point, I think the important thing to remember here is the decoy part of this. I think it's quite possible there are going to be times where we might not see him in a given game, or he might only be on the field for a play or two, and he might not even do anything per se. But I think just having him on the roster, having him as a potential threat to be on the field, whether it's lining up in a wildcat kind of a formation, whether it's lining up in the slot, even if he has no intention of catching a pass, or the Ravens throwing a pass to him, or if it's lining up as a running back, or if Joe Flacco comes off the field for a play. I think just the thought of that forces the opposition to prepare for it over the course of the week.
To spend an inordinate amount of time on it,
yeah,
honestly.
Yeah,
right?
and maybe they're not spending half their preparation time on it, but whatever time they're spending on that is less time they're spending on the, quote, traditional offense that the Ravens are going to run. So I think I think you're absolutely right from a standpoint of there is a balance here, and one of my concerns about this offense, even with as well as it's practiced over the course of the summer, and even as much as I've liked some of their new pass catchers, there really is a fear, maybe not a fear, but at least a need to be cognizant of not trying to do too much to the point where you're not mastering anything. You know, it's great to dabble in some gadget plays, some special formations where you might have two quarterbacks on the field, and that looks fun in the spring. That looks fun in the first or second week of training camp, but you need to make sure that it's applicable, and you need to make sure that it's not going to hijack the overall flow and rhythm of your, quote, regular offense. And that, when I say regular offense, meaning not having two quarterbacks on the field. So I think there is going to be some danger in saying, hey, the offense, the regular offense, so to speak, is performing well. We don't want to mess with the good thing. And I think those could be those instances where maybe you don't see him. And then there are inevitably going to be times, because even though I think this offense can be improved, I by no means think it's going to be a top 10 kind of unit. I think a realistic good scenario for the Ravens would be that this offense is kind of average, and that would be a lot of improvement from last year, mind you.
I'm seeing efficiency that I didn't see last year for sure, right? And
yeah,
I think we're seeing an upright version of Flacco that's good, although having James Hurst rolling around onto him again was not something I want to see in August, that's for sure.
Right. I mean, it's still such a small sample, even for the first-team offense. And, I mean, the point that you just made, and we haven't even mentioned Ronnie Stanley getting his knee kind of rolled into on that extra point early in the second quarter. Doesn't sound like it's anything serious, but we know how these things can go sometimes.
Well, guys that are 6'8" and weigh 340 pounds, everything's serious, right?
Well, I mean, we just know it's not, it wasn't a torn ACL. He was walking around with a limp after the game, actually towards the end of the game on the sideline Monday night. But my point is that offensive line depth is tenuous right now. I think the Ravens feel pretty good about their top six, and you just mentioned James Hurst. I kind of sort of feel okay about James Hurst as a backup. I don't feel good about him as the starting right tackle. I think that job should be Orlando Brown's, but we'll see how the Ravens go with that, because they do tend to defer to veterans, at least initially in some of these competitions.
That's a Harbaugh thing, right? I mean, literally, Harbaugh doesn't trust the young guys, and that's probably a lot of his personality, right?
Well, I mean, I don't want to just say that's a Harbaugh thing. That's a lot of coaches, quite frankly.
Sure.
So, but that said, I think Orlando Brown has played so well at right tackle for a rookie.
Took a lot of snaps Monday night. I mean, he was out there beating up the second and third teamers, which was good to see, right?
But I mean, he's started every game though. I mean, they've played. That's part of the reason why I'm not buying this whole James Hurst playing right tackle thing, because he's played right guard for Marshall Yanda the entire preseason so far. So I understand it's a competition. I understand that he's played right tackle in practice when Yanda's been practicing the last couple weeks. But James Hurst has never established himself as even a starting caliber right tackle, let alone, we know what he's looked like at left tackle in the past. So I still see Brown getting all these reps and really holding his own, and at times doing better than that. I don't see why you wouldn't just go with him, and I like Hurst much more in that swing role. But my point is, beyond those top six, and we're talking left to right, Stanley, Alex Lewis, Matt Skura, Yanda, whoever's starting at right tackle, and then the other one being the kind of the top reserve, there's still a lot of questions from the likes of Illuminor and Nico Siragusa and Greg Sanat and Bradley Bozeman. At least three of those guys, you would think are going to make the roster of kind of that second tier, or at least two of them, I should say. But I'm not sure who it's going to be, and I'm not sure that you have a ton of confidence in that tier, that kind of next tier of reserve linemen. So to see Ronnie Stanley leaving the field on Monday night, even though he wasn't carted off for anything catastrophic, it's still a reminder of, we can talk all we want about wide receivers and tight ends and even Joe Flacco's health, which those are all good things, that we've seen. But it's still going to come down to the health and the overall level of play of this offensive line determining how good this offense can be, because it impacts everything else that I just mentioned, including keeping Joe Flacco healthy. It's great that he's healthy now. You want to keep him that way. So that's where there's still some trepidation there that this offensive line might not have the kind of depth that you'd like to see. But I'll say this in fairness to the Ravens, just about every team around the NFL is saying that right now. I mean, offensive line play is just not good in this league right now, and I think the Ravens are, I think there's the start of a good offensive line, but they need to stay healthy, and they need some of those young guys to kind of fortify their depth.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter, and Luke at WNST.net. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. Rofo chicken out there, as well as the Rofo Rewards app, as well as the card. Make sure if you're pumping gas, and I know you are, I know you're stopping by Rofo, I know you're picking up either drinks or smokes or sandwiches, whatever it is, fried chicken, use the app, get the points. You'll get your fried chicken and your Western fries for free. It is Royal Farms, real fresh, real fast. Also, I caught Luke out at Pizza John's in Essex over the weekend on social media. Did you go meat, pepperoni? Would you go? You're like a meat sauce guy, right?
And meat sauce. I like it with just pepperoni or just meat sauce or both. So you can't go wrong with any of those competitions or any of those toppings.
I got to have mushrooms on mine. I'm a mushroom pizza guy. But I got a cheesesteak, brought it back. Pizza John's, they've been there 50 years. You know all about it. Back Riverneck Road, down in beautiful Essex. Also, King Discount Liquors, give the King a ring. Lottery, beer, booze, and the best prices in Baltimore. Johnny Bev's out there as well. I see their commercials when I'm watching Oriole baseball. Tell Paul King we said hello. They pulled my commercial because I had a Free the Bird shirt on. It's a long story. Luke, for the Jimmy Smith thing and the story to break about yet another suspension and games and how many and whatnot, we talk about deep depth and the problems at the offensive line and where's the depth of the quarterback, and they're going to keep a third quarterback, and it appears they are. The DB situation. I mean, we went from having too many to now Jimmy Smith again.
Yeah, and this is one of the reasons why I've kind of been skeptical about them keeping three quarterbacks. I mean, you have certain positions specifically on the defensive side of the ball where you have some really talented players. And I know that guys like Kamale Correa haven't necessarily lived up to expectations to this point, but I'm much more inclined to want to try to keep another defensive player or another offensive lineman, whatever it is, because things like this are going to happen as opposed to necessarily keeping a third quarterback that you're hoping you never have to play your backup quarterback, let alone needing to have a third one. But in the case of Jimmy Smith, I think this for me kind of started not necessarily with him, but when it came out a couple weeks ago that the Ravens were hosting Bashaud Breeland, the former Washington corner, starting caliber defensive back in the NFL, who's been a free agent. He had a deal that was voided early in the offseason because he had an injury where he didn't pass his physical. But this is a starting caliber corner, and it didn't add up. Why would the Ravens be trying to sign or at least expressing interest in a starting caliber corner when they have Jimmy Smith, they have Brandon Carr, and they have Marlon Humphrey? And that's not even taking into account quality backups like Tavon Young and Maurice Kennedy. I mean, guys that I think are starting caliber kind of players in this league. So it didn't make sense then. So it was one of those deals where you're thinking, okay, this is a red flag here that they'd even be considering this, and they didn't sign him ultimately, and we'll see if they'll revisit that if and when this Jimmy Smith suspension becomes official. But it was definitely something that those of us who follow the team closely had to be asking, this isn't adding up. He would be their fourth corner coming in here. It just doesn't add up. So that's where you were kind of on alert. If you recall, there had been a report last November about Jimmy Smith with a custody case with the mother of his first child. Now, there were never any criminal charges, but there were accusations of domestic violence or accusations of illegal drug use. I don't need to tell anyone that's been in an ugly custody case that sometimes things are said and sometimes they're true and sometimes they're not true. And we don't even know if this pending suspension, if and when it becomes official, is directly related to that or if it's something else. But it's certainly.
But the Ravens didn't wake up on Monday morning knowing about that. I mean, the Ravens have known about this for a long time.
And that's why I said about the interest in Breland. I think it's clear that this was something that's been on their radar. So it's not good. Certainly they have better depth than they did 3 or 4 years ago when we were talking about Asa Jackson or Shaky Brown being their number 3 corner. And guys like me were asking over and over, why aren't you doing more in your secondary? At the same time, I don't think this is something you just brush off either. Jimmy Smith is a Pro Bowl caliber corner when he's been on the field the last few years, and to not have him for potentially multiple games, as the report from The Athletic indicated, that's something that's some real adversity there, and that's something where you're not going to expect this defense to be as good as it could be with Jimmy Smith on the field. Doesn't mean that they're ruined. Doesn't mean that their season's sunk. But it is a challenge, and as I wrote at WNST.net, the combination of Jimmy Smith's pending suspension, or the report of it anyway, and then, as I mentioned, Ronnie Stanley getting nicked up just a little bit, but enough of a reminder to say that the offensive line's still a question. Monday kind of brought that first adversity of training camp, of the preseason for the Ravens, because until that point, it had been as close to flawless as you can reasonably find. In terms of lack of injuries and practicing well and doing okay in the preseason, but certainly Monday brought some dents to the armor, so to speak. Not that I think are insurmountable, but unfortunately, I guess fortunately, you could say the Ravens have gotten all too used to not having Jimmy Smith on the field, and we'll see what comes of this. He allegedly met with league officials on Monday, so we'll see how that appeal went. We'll see if this does in fact become official. You want to be on the WNST.net text service when that does become official. We get more clarity on that. We'll send that out to you. But it looks like the Ravens are going to be playing without Jimmy Smith for some number of games, and it's an all too familiar refrain for a guy that easily one of the more talented players in the history of the franchise, but just hasn't been able to reach that elite level. More so because of injuries, but now throwing another suspension into the mix as well.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke out on Twitter. You can always find him out with all the Ravens stuff, as well as getting ready for the Orioles remake here in the offseason. But we got our head down on Ravens activities. By the way, all of our Ravens live shows this year are going to be brought to you by Fremont Mortgage. Don't make a 30-year mistake by choosing the wrong lender. You need the right lender. We're going to be swabbing for the Bone Marrow Registry along with Carl Delmont and our friends. I think Coach Billick's going to get involved here in the fall as well. So we're going to be out doing a whole bunch of stuff. It's all going to be brought to you by Fremont Mortgage. Make sure you're checking them out. If you're buying, selling, thinking about it in the market, go out and check out what they're doing out there and get yourself the education you need at Freedmont.com. Also, a shout out to our friends at Al's Seafood. I was down with Chad on Saturday and I picked up some shrimp to go. Sometimes it's crabs, crab cakes. I did pick up 2 6-packs. I am guilty, but I was just in the mood for some shrimp and grits. Took some shrimp to go. Sunday morning, woke up. Took me 5 minutes. Butterflied them, threw them in the pan. Perfect. Al Seafood in Essex. They've been there longer than anyone. I was going to Al Seafood when I was a little boy. Stemmers Run and Eastern Avenue at the foot of 702. Give Chad the Crab Man a call, especially if you're looking to do a catered crab feast. That's what they specialize in down at Al Seafood. Chad does those. Been doing those 50 years. Better than anybody. Check it out. Stemmers Run and Eastern Avenue, Al's Seafood. Luke, for me with the fringe guys, right, that's the question now as Miami comes and Washington. We're going to blink, right? It's going to be next Thursday, next Friday, and we're going to have a real roster and who's going to be playing and who's going to be healthy. And to your point, Stanley and Smith and whatever adversity, Yonda, guys got to get in there. The fringe guys, who's at risk here? What are we going to be talking about over the next 5 days as far as cuts to names we know? You know, the Correas, the Perrymans, the Kafusis, the names that are familiar, Albert McClellan, for instance.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned some of them. I think you kind of go by position group. I mean, we already talked about will they or won't they keep a third quarterback. I think there are arguments against doing it. I do think there are arguments to be made for doing that. But when you keep a third quarterback, it's one less roster spot you have for a real player that is going to be on the field at least some of the time. Maybe they're not active every single Sunday, but has a chance to contribute as a special teams player or as a position player. I think we saw good things from Kenneth Dixon. He was someone that I really wanted to see on Monday night. Hadn't played in the first couple preseason games. I can't say I had been all that impressed with what I'd seen from him on the practice field as he's been banged up and had a hamstring issue. But he looked good. I think we got a little bit of clarity there, at least who the top three running backs are. And it's who we thought. Gus Edwards has had a nice summer, but not so sure about, wasn't at all convinced that he was pushing Kenneth Dixon for a roster spot. I look at the wide receiver group. I think the top four are set. Crabtree, John Brown, Willie Snead, Chris Moore. And after that, it's been a whole lot of meh. For the however many years in a row now, a young wide receiver competition that we've talked about in the spring and early in the summer hasn't come to fruition. I think Jaleel Scott has been a non-factor, and as a fourth-round pick, historically, that would tell you he's not in danger of not making the roster, but I think he only played 3 offensive snaps on Monday night. I mean, this is a guy that hasn't done much of anything in practice and didn't even play much on Monday night. So perhaps that's a tell that they're going to try to stash him if they can, if they get an opportunistic injury with him. But he's been a disappointment. We saw Jordan Lastly struggle to get separation and then drop a short touchdown pass from Robert Griffin III. So he hasn't done anything or enough, I should say, to distinguish himself and really put himself on the safely in line. Perriman had the good game last week, but didn't see him do much on Monday night. He's still not playing special teams, so I don't know what the expectation is there. But you go down the list, thinking that there's going to be another wide receiver, maybe 2 behind those top 4 that I mentioned, and I'm not sure who it is. We saw the 2 kick returners, Tim White and Janarian Grant, both put a ball on the turf. That's certainly not going to endear them with John Harbaugh and Jerry Rosberg. So I think that remains a question mark. So I already spent some time addressing the offensive line a little bit earlier in the segment, but you're trying to figure out, can you trust Nico Siragusa? Can you trust Greg Sinat or Bradley Bozeman or Jermaine Illuminor to be game day active reserve offensive linemen? And the answer to this point is I'm not sure we've seen enough to really say you can trust those guys. So are they going to be on the lookout for a veteran to add to the mix once final cuts are made? I think defensively, the usual suspects that you'd expect. I think Carl Davis is on the bubble more so because they're so deep on the defensive line, and he's in the final year of his rookie deal. I think Zach Sealer, their 7th-round pick, Ozzie Newsome's final draft pick, has done a nice job, but has he done enough to solidify his roster spot? I think Bronson Kafusi's probably on the outside looking in at this point. Linebacker, you mentioned Correa, you mentioned Albert McClellan. I think there's probably one spot between those 2 guys. So do you go with the experienced core special team player who was also coming off of an ACL injury, or do you go with Correa, who has been a disappointment but has looked a little bit better at outside linebacker is also a special teams player and is only a couple years removed from being a second-round pick, and we know that the Ravens, as most teams are this way, don't really want to give up on an early draft pick so soon. So I think those are, for the most part, the names you're talking about as far as being on the bubble. I think Jimmy Smith, the possible suspension for him, perhaps opens the door for Stanley John Baptiste to kind of be that extra corner that could be on the roster, however many games Smith is suspended. So I think that's who you're talking about, and you have a pretty nice group of bubble players there that I think 2-3 years ago, I feel like those guys would have all been safely on the roster. I feel like 2-3 years ago, you could do a mock roster and get to 49 or 50 players and then kind of say, okay, well, who else do we keep? But I think the Ravens, to their credit, they have built up enough depth. I still think there's questions as far as how much high-end depth they have, how much high-end talent they have, but I do think they've done a fine job building up the depth at a number of positions, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And God knows they should with the number of defensive players they've drafted over the last 5 to 6 years compared to offense. But I think they are going to have some tough decisions, and normally some of those tough decisions are weeded out by injuries, and you knock on wood that it continues, but the Ravens, they haven't been in that position, so it all adds up to potentially needing to cut 2 or 3 players that otherwise you would have really liked to have kept, and I'm not sure they're going to be able to do that because of needs at other positions and just the overall depth that they have on this roster as far as NFL caliber players.
Yeah, they're going to, rest up here and go down to Miami and throw it around on Saturday night, right? Like Flacco will really be airing it out for the final time on Saturday.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to see the traditional third preseason game as far as a playing time. I think you're going to see it be, they've kind of been on a 20-20-20 schedule with their starters, meaning 20 snaps in those 3 preseason games. So I think we'll see Flacco for a similar amount of time that we did on Monday night, which was a full quarter and a little bit into the second quarter. I think you're going to see that again, especially with this quick turnaround. As much as we talk about player safety in this league and the helmet rule and all these different things, Ravens are in the midst of playing 3 games in an 11-day period. That doesn't jive with the whole player safety thing, but that's just me.
Well, I mean, what they say and what they do,
you
know, it's always 2 different things. I mean, I've watched Thursday Night Football, so have you. All right, Luke's going to take a break. He's going to come back. We'll talk some Terps with him a little later on, as well as some Orioles. You can find him out at Baltimore Luke on Twitter and Luke at WNST.net. Who are the Orioles playing this week? Oh, yeah, Toronto. Okay, right, okay. And then the Yankees are here this weekend. So make your plans, Oriole fans. Kids are free. The Buy at Toyota.com audio vault is there 24 hours a day. It's also free. You can podcast, listen live, listen when you want, where you want, how you want, to what you want. A lot of Terps this week, a lot of Ravens this week, a lot of Orioles this week. As we get ready for the start of the regular season, some great in-depth conversations. I've enjoyed getting back on the radio here and mixing it up. Also, my book on my father and baseball and my love of baseball and the Orioles, which earned me this I Have Delusions of Grandeur t-shirt. This was Peter Angelos' quote. I should probably put that down at the bottom there. But we're also doing trips to Nashville. This is the final week, last chance to get on the 50th birthday celebration. I turned 50. I've gone with the silver beard look on the internet for a day or 2 this week. We'll see how it turns out. That's to honor Jeff Lynne of ELO, I think, and Tom Petty and all the traveling Wilburys and the Beatles and all that good stuff. But I'll get back on the horse. Nashville, it's country music, but it's not. There's rock and roll there, too. October 14th, my 50th birthday, we're going to the Jack Daniels Distillery. The trip is on sale under the Road Trips tab, but this is the deadline this week. I need to know by the weekend. I hope you join us. Toss me an email. Nasty at WNST.net. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live right here on our Facebook Live, where I look good when I shave, as well as our YouTube, WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.